Hey, it's Tim again. Today I'm diving into a chilling three-part story that stands on its own, terrifying and absolutely gripping. Grab a hot tea, get comfy, and brace yourself for a tale that still haunts me. My videos are perfect for background listening, but this one, you'll want to stay till the end. Support me with a like and subscribe. It means a lot. Let's get started. My grandma used to tell me scary stories when I was little. There's one I'll never forget. I was 10 years old when Grandma came to live with us. It was about 6 months after Granddad passed away, and I guess, looking back, she must have been lonely in that big house of theirs, rattling around with only the grief and memories for company. So, despite a few protests from Mum, my parents took her in. There were no protests from me. None at all. Grandma was loud and fun, and I loved her. She had an almost limitless supply of boiled sweets, and she'd always slip me a couple whenever she saw me. She was always the first to stick up for me when I got in trouble, too. But it was her stories I loved best. Grandma had all kinds of stories. Stories about growing up during WW2 and stories about the things she'd get up to with her friends on the South Coast after her family had been evacuated. Sad stories, funny stories, adventure stories. But it was her scary stories that were my favorite. Grandma had lots of scary stories. She told me she dabbled in the occult when she was a teenager, trying out Ouija boards with her friends. Tarot cards, fortune-telling, all that stuff. Most of the stories I'd laugh off or forget about not long after she was done telling them. But there were a couple that really did spook me a bit. I was only 10 at the time, you have to understand, and Grandma certainly knew how to bring the stories to life. She'd shut off the lights in my room, so only the glow of the night sky shone through the curtains, and she'd shuffle in real close enough so I could see the wrinkles on her face and smell the boiled sweets on her breath, close enough so her deep blue eyes could stare straight into mine. She must have given me nightmares with a few of those tales, but now, years later, there's only one that I can still remember, only one that stuck with me. The story about the shower and Mr. Longfingers. Grandma told me about Mr. Longfingers one night after I asked about her baths. Grandma used to love her baths. She'd spend ages in them, light candles and incense, and lie in the tub humming to herself until the water turned cold. It drove my mum crazy, but when I asked her why she loved them so much, she said it was the only place she could relax. It was the only place that was safe for her to relax. You know, people like me who are, well, more sensitive to certain things, we have to have baths, she told me seriously one night, shuffling closer on the bed. I couldn't possibly spend that long in the shower. It'd be far too risky. Grandma stared at me with those blue eyes of hers, unsmiling, and I knew it was time for one of her stories, one of the scary ones. I shivered with pleasure and pulled the covers up to my chin.
Why is it risky, Grandma? She half turned to look out the window, watching me from the corner of her eye, pausing for effect. I waited, feeling my heart rate pick up ever so slightly in my chest. Well, she said after a moment, it's only risky if you close your eyes, of course. If you close your eyes for longer than 10 seconds. What do you mean? Why? Well, do you ever play that game in the playground with your friends? The one where someone turns their back and the others sneak up on them when they're not looking? I nodded, and Grandma nodded back. Exactly. So that's what it's like in the shower when you have your eyes closed. That's what it's like with Mr. Longfingers. A cold itch tickled my back. Who's Mr. Longfingers, Grandma? She let out a deep breath, as if she wished she hadn't said anything, turned her head back to face mine. When she next spoke, she had lowered her voice. No one knows exactly, Grandma whispered. Some think it's a creature that's attracted to the heat and smell we give off in there. Others think it's a demon that finds a way into our realm through the dense steam clouds. No one can say for sure, because the only ones who have actually seen Mr. Longfingers aren't ever going to be able to tell you.
I pulled in a breath. Why not? Grandma shuffled closer along the bed and leaned towards me, leaving my question hanging in the air. Don't you worry about it, sweetheart. Don't worry your pretty head. As long as you remember the rules, you'll be fine. What rules? Well, when you're in the shower, you try not to close your eyes for too long. 5 seconds is fine, and 10 is just about okay too. But any longer than that... Yeah? Then what? Well, any longer than that, and you may just start to feel something in the room with you, something watching. And if you ever go longer than 15 seconds, that's when you might start to hear a noise too. Hear what? The soft tap, tap, tap of fingers on glass, fingers drumming against the glass door of the shower. If you do ever hear that noise, God forbid, will you make me a promise? What, Grandma? Promise me you'll never open your eyes. I barely slept that night, hardly at all. I'd close my eyes and try to relax, but every time I did, I'd imagine a face pressed against my bedroom window, staring in at me. And when I did finally get to sleep, I had nightmares, bad ones. I had them all week, in fact. Dreams about disembodied eyes watching me in the dark, and long fingers reaching out to touch my exposed skin.
It wasn't any better when I was awake either. Not really. The shower was the worst. That's when Grandma's story really got to me. I'd never thought about it before, but suddenly I had trouble shutting my eyes in there. I'd be standing beneath the beating water, shampoo running down my face, and as soon as I squinted my eyelids closed, I'd hear Grandma's words running through my head. 5 seconds is fine, and 10 is just about okay too, but any longer than that... I'd rub my hair fast, feeling the shampoo dripping off my chin, and as soon as I'd counted past 5 seconds, I'd feel it, a sort of pressure. Not a feeling of being watched exactly, but something close to that. I'd run my fingers faster and faster through my hair, frantically trying to get the suds out, and the ready blackness behind my closed eyes, coupled with the rush of water in my ears, would feel like a held breath, like the silence before a scream. The seconds would race through my mind, and I'd be so desperate to open my eyes again that I'd sometimes do it before my hair was rinsed fully clean, and my eyes would sting with shampoo. But before I shut them again, I'd always be sure to peer out through the steamed glass door of the shower cubicle, just to make sure I was still alone.
The first part of the story sets an engaging and atmospheric tone, immersing the reader in a world of childhood memories filled with warmth and mystery. The author skillfully portrays the grandmother as a vibrant, loving, and slightly eccentric figure whose stories captivate and frighten the young narrator. The mention of her tales, especially the spooky ones, and the hint of the mysterious Mr. Longfingers create a sense of creeping dread, perfect for the horror genre. The depiction of family life and relationships adds authenticity, making the characters feel real and relatable. This opening leaves the reader eager for more, promising the unraveling of something sinister, and masterfully sets the stage for the continuation. Let's continue and move on to the second part of the story.
Part 2. My grandma used to tell me scary stories when I was little. There's one I only just remembered. It's starting to come back to me, slowly, bit by bit. I don't know if it was opening up about my grandma's other bedtime story that did it, or the fact my wife finally persuaded me to try counseling. But whatever the reason, the memories are returning.
Memories from my childhood. Memories of Grandma. Memories of the stories she used to tell me before I went to sleep. See, I always knew there were others. Other tales that scared me when I was little. But the time before I was a teenager is like a dark landscape. Only a few small patches are lit up. It's getting clearer now, though. The shadows that litter that black land are finally being forced to retreat. The thing is, I'm not sure I want to see what they've been hiding.
I must have been around 7 years old when Grandma told me about the special knock. I was tucked up in bed at my parents' first house, in my little room at the back at the time. Grandma was perched by my feet. I'd been crying. I don't know what upset me, but I remember my eyes blurring and my nose running. I remember probing a cut in my lip, touching it over and over again with my tongue. I remember the frown on Grandma's face, a look that was half concern, half something else. After she'd grabbed a tissue for me and wiped my face, she got up and walked away from the bed, wandered over to the cupboard on the opposite side of my room. I remember that cupboard well. Before we moved to our second home, that cupboard was the source of many sleepless nights for me, many nightmares. I used to imagine all sorts of things about it. I'd lie awake, sometimes for hours, and I'd have to keep peeking my eyes open to check the cupboard door was still closed, to make sure it was shut tight.
See, whenever my eyes were closed and I heard a creak somewhere in the house, I'd imagine it was the cupboard door, that something on the far side was trying to open it, ever so softly, so it could come and get me while I slept. I'd never told anyone about this fear. Even at 7 years old, I knew it was stupid. Baby stuff. But as I watched my grandma stop in front of the cupboard and lean her wrinkled cheek against the wood, I felt myself growing tense all the same. Even though the lights were on, even though there was an adult in the room with me. And when Grandma closed her eyes and started whispering, I had to fight back the urge to shout for my parents. "Grandma?" I could hear the uncertainty in my voice. "Grandma, what are you doing?" For a few more seconds, she didn't respond. Just kept her eyes closed and kept muttering. Then, abruptly, she turned to face me again, smiled, and when she came back and resumed her usual position at the foot of my bed, I knew it was story time. "Did I ever tell you about the special knock, sweetheart?" I shook my head. "No? Well, maybe I was waiting until you were a bit older. The special knock can be wonderful. It can lead you to see things you wouldn't even be able to conjure up in dreams. But it can also be, well, dangerous." Grandma glanced away from me, towards the bedroom door. "Maybe it's one for another time, in fact. I really should be getting home to see your grandfather, and I wouldn't want to scare you." She started to get up from the bed, but I stopped her. "No, don't go, Grandma. What's the special knock?" Grandma's blue eyes twinkled. She hovered where she was for a moment, then sat back down. "The special knock is an old trick a friend of mine taught me when I was younger," she began. "Not everyone can do it, and not everyone would want to. You have to be brave and careful and, well, special." Grandma smiled at me. "Like you." As I watched her, she reached into the front pocket of her cardigan and pulled out 2 boiled sweets, passed one to me. I'd already brushed my teeth, and I knew Mom would kill me if she caught me eating sweets before bed, but this was my time alone with Grandma. Mom was downstairs with Dad. She'd never know. I unwrapped the sweet and popped it in my mouth, feeling the sticky mint wash over my tongue. The cut in my lip stung slightly, but I ignored it. "When I was over by your cupboard door just now, I was using the magic words. Secret words that only a few other people know. Do you know what those words do?" I shook my head. "They turn a door into a window. A sort of gateway. The thing is, sweetheart, this place you spend your days in, this house where you live, and the building you go to school in, and the town you visit with your mother at the weekends, it's not the only place.
There are other places, too. And if you use the special knock on that cupboard door of yours now that I've whispered the magic words to it, you'll see them. You'll be able to see those other places for yourself." I stared at Grandma, concentrating on her words, absorbing them. Mint flooded my mouth, but I forgot to swallow. "Now listen to me very carefully," Grandma continued, "because this is the important bit. The way you open the window is by doing the special knock, but you have to be precise. 7 knocks on the door, that's what you'll want. 7 knocks, no more, no less. Then you open it. You won't be able to step through, but you'll have one heck of a view, all right." I swallowed. "A view of what?" "I don't know its real name, but the woman who taught me the special knock had her own name for it. She called it the lunar plane. 7 knocks takes you to the lunar plane. I could try and describe it to you, sweetheart, but I honestly don't think I could do it justice. You'd just have to see it for yourself. All I'll say is, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. And trust me, I've seen plenty." Grandma plucked the sweet wrappers up from the duvet, put them back in her pocket. She put her hands on her legs as if bracing herself to stand. Then she paused. "How many knocks did I say?" "7, Grandma." "That's right, 7. Don't forget it either. If you get the wrong number, and then open the door—" She glanced across at the cupboard and frowned. "Well, just make sure you don't get the wrong number, okay?" "Okay, Grandma." "And will you make me a promise?" "What?" "If you do somehow knock the wrong number of times, especially if that number happens to be 13 or something close to it, then whatever you do, don't open the door, okay? Don't open it no matter what you hear on the other side. The last thing you want is to open a gateway to the Blacklands." I felt icy fingers down my back. I glanced across at the closed cupboard door in the shadows at the far end of my bedroom. "What's the Blacklands?" Grandma stood up and wandered over to me, leaned down and gave me a kiss. "You don't want to know," she whispered.
I spent the next week avoiding the cupboard. I didn't go anywhere near it. Tried not to even look in its direction. Did my best to push Grandma's story as far out of my mind as I could. It wasn't easy. Whenever I was alone in my room and the house was silent, I'd feel it. A sort of pull. Like when someone tells you not to look at something, and suddenly all you want to do is take a quick peek. The feeling was sort of like that, but it was different too. Stronger. Sometimes, when I was lying in bed at night, I'd feel the cupboard almost like a weight in my mind. A heavy, static energy. It made me restless, made me want to scrunch up my fists and grip my teeth. When I turned away from the cupboard, my skin itched. Like the pores had tiny, invisible bugs in them. It made it hard for me to sleep. And when I did sleep, I had dreams. Sometimes the dreams were pleasant, floaty ones. I'd dream I was on a cloud, hovering through multicolored planes of light, flying through an endless sea of stars. I'd wake from these dreams feeling happy and safe, like how I felt when Mom hugged me and stroked my hair. But other times, I had nightmares. The nightmares I had during that week were the worst I ever remembered having in my life. Horrible, half-glimpsed blurs. Images I'd wake from with a scream lodged in my throat, my sweat-soaked pajamas sticking to the skin of my back. At the time, I didn't remember the nightmares themselves, at least not completely. But every time I woke from one, I was left with the same fading image. An image of myself, surrounded by thick, choking blackness. Dense shadows everywhere. I couldn't see a thing, but I had the sense that I was standing at the center of a vast, open space. Wind howled around me. Sounds echoed. I wanted to open my mouth and yell for help, but I couldn't bring myself to, because I knew I wasn't alone.
Part 3. Why would you tell a 5-year-old kid such a fucked up tale? Ever since the memory of my 5th birthday came back to me, this is the question I've kept asking myself, but I don't have the answer. I suppose I shouldn't be that surprised, given the other stories my grandma told me when I was little. The one about Mr. Longfingers, for instance, and the secret of the special knock. I really shouldn't be surprised at all. What follows is a memory from the day I turned 5. I must have been repressing that day for years, because it's taken weeks of therapy for me to unlock it.
Grandma, will you tell me a story before bed? She was halfway to the bedroom door when my words stopped her. I didn't want her to go. Grandma had just tucked me in and turned off my bedside lamp, and I suddenly felt afraid. Partly it was the darkness of my bedroom. The shadows were so thick I could barely make out my stuffed toys sitting in a row on top of my dresser. But mainly, it was my new birthday present. The present Grandma had got me. It wasn't my main present. That was the pack of monsters in my pocket toys I'd ripped open downstairs. No, this was an extra present. A secret present. I hated it. Even in the dark, I could see its shadowy outline on my bedside table. The thing gave me the creeps. A story? Well, what kind of story would you like to hear? It was a silly question because Grandma only ever told me one kind of story, the scary kind. But because I was already a bit freaked out, I said something I wouldn't normally have done. Nothing too scary, Grandma. Grandma raised her eyebrows at me. Not too scary? I shook my head. She leaned over and switched my bedside light back on, then perched at the foot of my bed, smiled down at me. Out of the corner of my eye, I could still see Grandma's present. It was watching me from my bedside table. I did my best to ignore it. "Okay," said Grandma, making herself comfortable. "I think I'll tell you a story about a witch." "Once upon a time," Grandma began, "there was a young woman who lived in a cottage by the sea. She didn't have a care in the world. She went to school, and she painted, and she read adventure books by the fire in the evening. This girl lived with her mother and her grandmother, and they were all very close. She loved her family very much. One day in the early summer, the girl was coming home from school when she met a boy on the path. She'd never spoken to him before, but she recognized him well enough. He wore the same uniform she did, after all, and she guessed he must be in the year above her at school. "Where are you off to?" said the boy. His shirt was untucked, and he was smoking a cigarette. The girl hesitated. Her mother had told her cigarettes were bad. She'd also told her never to speak to strangers on her way home from school. But then again, thought the girl, was this boy actually a stranger? The headmaster at their school said they were all one big family. If this boy wore the same uniform as her, they couldn't really be strangers, could they? "I'm going home," answered the girl. "My house is along this path." The boy finished his cigarette, then flicked it into the grass. He smiled at the girl. "Before you go home, don't you want to see something cool?" he asked. The girl was curious, but she also knew she couldn't be late. Her mother would worry terribly if she was late. So she thanked the boy and told him she had to be on her way. But just as she'd walked past him, he called out to her again. "It's a puppy," said the boy. "Our dog had a litter of puppies last week, and Dad said I could keep one. It's in this old barn near my house. Don't you want to see the puppy?"
Now, the girl loved puppies. She'd wanted a dog for as long as she could remember, but her mother always said they couldn't afford one. Right then, she'd have given anything in the world to pet a cute little puppy. When she closed her eyes, she could just picture it, a happy little dog with a big pink tongue and a wagging tail. Eager to meet her, the girl paused and looked down the path that led back to her house. She thought about her mother. Then she looked back at the boy, who was smiling at her. Was there really any harm, thought the girl, in taking a quick look? So the girl followed the boy, and he led her over a stile and across a big field, and they kept going and going until the girl saw a large barn towering in the distance. And she was so excited that she walked as fast as she could, and the boy laughed and walked right along with her. The girl only started to feel nervous when they were right outside the barn.
It had taken longer to get there than she had thought it would, and the sun was a lot lower in the sky now. She was going to be late getting home. Her mother would be worried. She wanted to see the puppy quickly so she could hurry back, but the barn was dark and full of shadows, and she couldn't see any sign of it inside. "It's just over here at the back," whispered the boy, as he took her hand and led her into the shadows. "He's going to be so excited to see you." So the girl took his hand and followed him, and even though his palm was sweaty, she held on to it tight, because she was suddenly starting to feel afraid. It was only when she heard footsteps and laughter behind her and turned to see two bigger boys emerging from the barn's shadows that the fear inside her turned to terror.
When the girl finally got back home, the sun was setting over the ocean, and the sea was the color of blood. The girl made it through the door of the little cottage before she collapsed in a heap in the hallway, crying her eyes out. It was her grandmother who found her like that. Now, the girl's grandmother was very old and very wise. Mother used to tell her that Grandma had lived so long and seen so much that she knew all the world's secrets. When she was little, the girl had been frightened of her grandmother. But now the old lady took the young woman in her arms, and she comforted her, told the girl her mother was working late and she wouldn't be home for a while, told the girl she could tell her anything she wanted, and in the hallway of their little cottage, the girl did. She told her grandmother about the boy and the barn and all the horrible things those bigger boys had done to her in the shadows. And her grandmother listened, and she grew very silent and very still. "Come with me," she said. The girl had hardly ever been in her grandmother's room before. When she was little, it always gave her the creeps. Her grandmother had lots of old, scary paintings on the walls and strange little statues and carvings on her shelves. But right then, as her grandmother led her to an old wooden chair and sat her down, the girl hardly even noticed them. Her grandmother was speaking to her in a soothing voice, and all she could do was listen. She listened as her grandmother told her that there was a special trick she knew, a trick to protect against evil, a trick to protect her against those horrible boys, so that they'd never be able to hurt her again, so that she'd have control of them.
As grandmother spoke, she fetched an old wooden box from the bottom of her wardrobe and unlocked it. Inside the box were countless knitted dolls. All of the dolls were the same blank cream color, with no facial features at all, save for the eyes. Every single doll had a pair of eyes that seemed to follow the girl. As grandmother pulled 3 dolls out of the box, she closed her own eyes, began to whisper. The sound made the girl's skin itch, but it didn't last long. Soon her grandmother had lined the dolls up on the carpet, and her eyes were open again. The last thing she pulled from the box were a pair of black knitting needles and some yarn. "Those boys that hurt you, sweetheart," she whispered, "I want you to describe them to me." And although she was still terrified, and although it made her feel sick, the girl did. She described the boys as well as she could remember. She described them as her grandmother went to work with her needles. And finally, with the blood-red sun disappearing below the sea outside the cottage window, the dolls were finished. The girl's grandmother took the girl by the hands and looked into her eyes. "I want you to keep hold of these dolls, sweetheart," she whispered. "As long as you have possession of them, those boys will never be able to hurt you again." And do you know what? Those boys never did. The girl was sitting in an armchair overlooking the sea when her grandmother burst through the door of the cottage. It was 2 days after they'd made the dolls, and for the first time since she'd met the boy on the pathway, the girl was feeling calm again. She was feeling calm, but her grandmother clearly wasn't. As the girl turned from the window and smiled in greeting, the old woman held a newspaper out to the girl with shaking hands. "3 brothers tortured and killed in brutal mass slaying," read the headline. "Agatha," whispered her grandmother. "Oh, Agatha, what did you do?" But the girl just kept smiling. She kept smiling as she took her grandmother by the hand and led her upstairs to her bedroom. She kept smiling as she opened her little cupboard and pulled out a cardboard box. And when the old lady cried out in shock and horror as she saw the 3 dolls inside, the girl kept smiling still.
"What did you do, Agatha?" whispered her grandmother again. But it was pretty obvious what the girl had done. Each of the dolls had been impaled with at least a dozen sewing pins, all of which had been pushed through their knitted heads. The area below each of their waists had been burned black with a flame. The girl smiled down at her work and took her grandmother's shaking hands in her own. "They won't be hurting anyone now, will they?" she whispered. The third part of the story masterfully builds suspense and introduces a pivotal moment in the narrative. The seemingly innocent encounter between the girl and the boy on the path is laced with subtle unease, as the boy's casual demeanor and cigarette flicking hint at underlying danger. The girl's internal conflict, balancing her curiosity with her mother's warnings, feels authentic and relatable, grounding the story in a realistic emotional struggle. The pacing is excellent, with the gradual shift from curiosity to hesitation as the girl follows the boy to the barn, creating a creeping sense of dread. The mention of the puppy is a clever narrative device, exploiting the girl's innocence and love for animals to lure her into a potentially dangerous situation. This part sets up the impending horror beautifully, leaving the listener on edge, eager to know what happens next, while foreshadowing the dark turn the story will take. Thank you so much for listening all the way through. If you enjoyed this, please support us with a like and a subscription. Wishing everyone a great day.